The morning sun had just started peeking through the clouds, washing the quiet street in a pale golden light. The air was crisp and the soft hum of the town was beginning to grow. Inside a small tailor shop on the corner, a young woman named Clara bent over her sewing machine, her fingers moving carefully through a piece of fabric. The gentle rhythm of the machine filled the little shop, blending with the scent of fresh thread and old wood. Clara had been a seamstress for almost 5 years. It wasn't an easy life, but she was proud of her work. Her parents had passed away when she was still a teenager, and she had learned to sew out of necessity. What started as a way to make ends meet had slowly become her craft, her passion. She stitched clothes for the people of the town, uniforms for the school children, dresses for weddings, and repairs for the elderly who couldn't afford new things. Each stitch carried her effort, her patience, and her quiet hope for a better tomorrow. That morning, as she worked on a blue dress that a customer needed by evening, she noticed something outside the shop window. A man, perhaps in his 70s, was sitting on a wooden bench near the street lamp. His coat looked worn and thin for the chilly weather. His hair was white, his beard scruffy, and his hands were clasped tightly as though he was trying to warm them. People passed him without looking, hurrying to their own busy days. Clara's eyes lingered on him. There was something about the way he sat, not begging, not asking for attention, just quiet and tired, as if the world had moved on without him. For a moment she tried to return to her sewing, but her thoughts kept wandering back to the old man. The idea of him sitting there in the cold tugged at her heart. When she finally looked up again, he was still there. She sighed softly, reached for her wallet, and took a few coins she had saved from the week's pay. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a cup of coffee and maybe a pastry. She put on her coat and stepped outside, the morning chill brushing against her cheeks. The cafe across the street was small and cozy. The owner greeted her with a smile, already familiar with her usual order. But this time Clara asked for 2 coffees, one black and one with cream, and a small pastry. As the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, she glanced out the cafe window again. The old man hadn't moved. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, holding the warm paper cups in her hands. "Good morning, sir," she said gently when she reached him. "It's quite cold today. I thought you might like some coffee." The old man looked up slowly, his tired eyes full of surprise. For a second he seemed unsure whether to accept it. Then his face softened and he smiled faintly, showing the kind of gratitude that words couldn't express. "You didn't have to do that, young lady," he said in a voice that sounded rough but kind. "But thank you. I can't remember the last time someone brought me coffee." "It's nothing," Clara said, handing him the cup. "I just thought you could use something warm." He accepted it with both hands, holding it close to his chest as if it were something precious. Steam curled around his fingers. "You've made my morning brighter than you can imagine," he said, chuckling softly. "My name's Mr. Bennett." "I'm Clara," she replied with a smile. "I work in the tailor shop over there." Mr. Bennett nodded slowly. "Ah, the one with the blue curtains. I've passed by that place many times. I used to be a carpenter, you know. Built furniture for half the houses in this town back in the day." Clara's eyes lit up. "Really? That's amazing. Carpentry is such a beautiful skill." The old man laughed lightly, though it carried a hint of sadness. "It was. My hands aren't what they used to be. I had to stop after I fell sick a few years back. Lost the workshop. Lost most things, really." Clara didn't know what to say for a moment. She simply sat beside him on the bench, the sound of morning traffic filling the silence. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He waved his hand dismissively. Don't be. Life has a way of teaching us patience. I've learned to take it one day at a time." For a while, they just sat there, sipping their coffee. Clara found comfort in his calmness. Even though his clothes were worn and his shoes had holes, there was dignity in the way he carried himself. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for anything. He just existed peacefully, as though he had made peace with his past. When she stood up to leave, he thanked her again. "Clara," he said softly, "you've done more than you think. People walk by me every day, but you stopped. Don't lose that kindness. It's rare." She smiled shyly, adjusting her coat. "You take care, Mr. Bennett. I'll see you around." As she walked back to her shop, something inside her felt lighter. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt meaningful, like a quiet reminder that goodness still mattered in the world. The rest of the day passed as usual. Customers came and went, and Clara worked diligently, her mind drifting now and then to the old man. She wondered where he lived, whether he had a family, whether he would be all right through the night's cold. When evening came, she stepped outside again, but the bench was empty. The next morning, Clara looked out the window before starting her sewing. The street was quieter than usual, the bench still empty. She tried not to feel disappointed, telling herself maybe he had found shelter or moved to another part of town. Still, a small part of her hoped to see him again. 3 days later, her wish came true. When she arrived at the shop early one morning, there he was again. Same bench, same old coat, holding a newspaper someone must have left behind. His smile grew wide when he saw her. "Ah, Clara," the kind young lady with good coffee. She laughed, surprised he remembered her name. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett, you're up early." He nodded. "Old habits die hard. I used to open my workshop before sunrise. Can't seem to sleep much these days. Would you like some breakfast?" she asked without thinking. He hesitated. "You've already done more than enough. I insist," she said with a friendly firmness. "Wait right here." 10 minutes later, she returned with 2 sandwiches and 2 cups of coffee. They sat together again, talking about small things, the changing weather, the people passing by, the little things that made up life. She learned that he once had a small workshop on Maple Street, that he loved making rocking chairs, and that he had a son who had gone to work in another city. "He's a good boy," Mr. Bennett said softly. "Sends letters sometimes. Life just takes people in different directions." Clara nodded, understanding more than she let on. She too had lost people, not through distance but through time and circumstance. Yet listening to him made her realize how deeply kindness and memory could hold people together. In the weeks that followed, she saw Mr. Bennett several more times. Sometimes she would bring him leftover bread from the shop owner next door, sometimes just a cup of tea. They never talked about charity, Gwen. It wasn't about that. It was about company. 2 souls who had found comfort in each other's presence. One windy afternoon, he showed her a small wooden keychain he had carved from a piece of scrap wood. It was shaped like a tiny heart. "Made this yesterday," he said proudly. "Can't do much with my hands now, but I can still make small things." "It's beautiful," Clara said honestly. "Then it's yours," he said, handing it to her. She hesitated, touched by the gesture. "I can't take that." "Of course you can. It's a gift, for reminding me there's still goodness left in this world." Clara accepted it carefully, as though holding something fragile. She slipped it into her pocket, feeling its rough edges against her palm. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'll treasure it." When she returned to her shop, she placed the keychain on her work table beside her sewing tools. Every time she looked at it, she thought of the quiet smile on the old man's face. It reminded her that even small acts could carry meaning, that sometimes life's biggest changes began with the simplest gestures. That night, as she locked up and headed home, the streetlights flickered against the pavement. The bench where Mr. Bennett usually sat was empty again, but Clara smiled softly to herself. She didn't feel sad this time. Something in her heart told her their paths would cross again, and when they did, maybe she would finally ask him more about his son, the one who had moved away and unknowingly would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. Clara walked home through the quiet streets, her steps slow, her thoughts gentle. The little keychain swung in her pocket with every movement, tapping softly like a heartbeat, a small reminder that kindness, once given, never truly disappears. It circles back in its own time, in its own way. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small town carried its familiar rhythm. The tailor shop remained busy, as always, with customers coming in for fittings and repairs. Clara spent most of her days surrounded by fabrics, threads, and the soft hum of the sewing machine. Yet now there was something different about her days, a sense of quiet anticipation. She often found herself glancing out the window, hoping to see a familiar figure sitting on the old bench near the street lamp. Mr. Bennett had become part of her daily life, though she didn't realize when it had happened. Some mornings she would see him reading a worn newspaper someone had left behind. Other days he would stop by the shop to greet her through the open door, waving his hand with a cheerful smile. Their short talks had turned into longer conversations about life, dreams, and the little moments that make each day worth living. One morning, as she was adjusting a dress on a mannequin, she heard the sound of his voice outside. "You're early today," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Clara looked up with a grin. "So are you, Mr. Bennett. I thought you might still be asleep." "Sleep is a luxury for people with soft beds," he said with a laugh. "I like watching the town wake up. It reminds me of the days when I'd open my workshop before sunrise. There's something peaceful about it." She motioned for him to come inside. "You can sit here if you'd like. It's warmer." He hesitated for a moment before stepping in. It was his first time inside the shop. His eyes roamed over the shelves filled with folded fabric and half-finished garments. "You've got quite the setup here," he said softly. "You must be proud." Clara smiled as she threaded her needle. "It's small, but it's mine. One day, I want to have a bigger place and with a display window, maybe even my own sign out front." Mr. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. "And you will. You've got the kind of hands that build something from nothing. I can tell." She looked up at him, touched by his words. "That means a lot coming from someone who built half the furniture in town." He chuckled. "Those were good days. I loved shaping wood, giving it a purpose. Funny thing about life. When you lose what you love, you think it's gone for good. But sometimes, it finds its way back through people you meet." Clara paused for a moment, watching him sip the tea she had handed him. His hand shook slightly as he held the cup, but there was peace in his eyes. "You really think things come back around?" she asked quietly. "I do," he said with a nod. "Kindness always circles back. Maybe not how you expect, but it does." The word stayed with her long after he left that morning. Later that afternoon, as rain began to fall, Clara finished her last order for the day and closed the shop early. She saw Mr. Bennett sitting outside under the small awning, his shoulders hunched against the drizzle. Without a word, she stepped inside, grabbed an old umbrella, and walked over to him. "You'll catch a cold sitting here," she said, holding the umbrella above him. He looked up at her with surprise, then smiled faintly. "You again with your big heart?" "Someone has to make sure you don't get soaked," she said, sitting beside him under the small shelter. The rain pattered softly against the fabric of the umbrella. For a while they watched people rush by, their footsteps splashing through puddles. "You know," he said after a while, "my son used to love the rain. When he was a boy, he'd run outside and splash in puddles until his mother yelled at him to come in." Clara laughed gently. "Sounds like a happy child." "He was," Mr. Bennett said, his eyes distant. "He grew up smart, hard-working. Always said he'd make something of himself, and he did. He moved to another city, found a good job. We lost touch for a while after his mother passed away. I suppose life gets busy." There was a long pause. Clara sensed the sadness behind his words. "Do you hear from him now?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he said. "He writes. Sends money when he can. He doesn't know how rough things have gotten for me lately." "I didn't want to worry him." Clara nodded, understanding. "Parents always protect their children even when the children are grown." He gave a tired smile. "That's right. And you, Clara? What about your family?" Her voice grew quiet. "It's just me now. My parents passed away when I was young. Sewing kept me going. It gave me something to hold on to." Mr. Bennett looked at her kindly. "You've done well for yourself. You've built a life out of hard work. That's something to be proud of." The rain fell harder, but under the umbrella they were safe. Two strangers turned friends, bound by simple acts of care. When the clouds finally began to clear, Clara stood and offered to walk him to the small shelter where he often stayed. It wasn't much, just a corner near an old building where the roof extended enough to keep out the worst of the weather. She made sure he was comfortable before heading home, her shoes splashing lightly through the puddles. That night she couldn't stop thinking about him. His life, his quiet strength, the way he spoke about his son with both pride and sorrow. She wished there was more she could do, but for now her small acts would have to be enough. The next few days passed quietly. Clara worked, chatted with customers, and checked on Mr. Bennett whenever she could. One morning she found him repairing a broken wooden chair near the park. "You still got the touch," she said teasingly. He smiled without looking up. "Old habits die hard. Found this chair by the trash. Thought I'd fix it up. Might as well make myself useful." Clara watched him for a while, noticing the care he took with every movement. Even though his hands trembled slightly, he worked with precision, shaping the wood with patience. She felt inspired just watching him. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "you should come by the shop sometime and help me fix the old stool in the back. It's wobbly," he chuckled. You sure you want an old man messing with your furniture? I'm sure, she said with a grin. I'll even pay you in coffee. He laughed, shaking his head. You drive a hard bargain, young lady. True to her word, the next morning she brought the stool to the front of the shop, and he spent an hour tightening its legs and sanding down the rough edges. When he finished, the stool looked almost new. Clara was amazed. You're a magician, she said. Just a man who's been around a lot of wood, he replied with a smile. As he sipped the coffee she handed him, he added softly, It feels good to work again. Even for a little while. Makes me feel alive. Clara nodded, watching him with genuine warmth. I'm glad. You should never stop doing what you love. Their bond grew stronger after that. The people around the town began to notice the young seamstress and the old carpenter, who often shared coffee and laughter outside the tailor shop. Some thought it was odd, others found it heartwarming. To Clara, it didn't matter what anyone thought. She had gained a friend who reminded her of what truly mattered. Kindness, respect, and the simple act of caring for someone without expecting anything in return. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street in shades of orange and pink, Mr. Bennett stopped by the shop with a small wooden box in his hands. Made something for you, he said, handing it to her. Clara opened it carefully. Inside was a tiny wooden sewing machine, carved with delicate detail. It looked almost real. Her eyes widened in surprise. You made this? He nodded. Had a bit of scrap wood left. Thought it might bring you luck. Every seamstress deserves a lucky charm. Her eyes softened as she ran her fingers over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'll keep it forever. Just a little something to remind you to keep stitching your dreams, he said with a wink. That night, as she placed the wooden sewing machine beside the heart-shaped keychain on her work table, Clara couldn't help but smile. Her small shop suddenly felt warmer, filled with the quiet comfort of friendship and gratitude. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she felt something was changing. Something good. The next morning, however, Mr. Bennett didn't show up. Nor did he come the day after. Clara tried not to worry, thinking maybe he had found shelter elsewhere or was visiting someone. But as days passed, her heart grew heavy with concern. She walked around the nearby streets, asking a few people if they had seen him. Most shook their heads. Then one evening, just as she was about to close the shop, she saw a familiar figure walking slowly down the street. Relief flooded her. She hurried outside. Mr. Bennett, where have you been? He smiled weakly, his step slower than before. I'm sorry, Clara, I caught a bit of a cold. Needed a few days to rest. You should have told me, she said softly, her eyes full of concern. I was worried. He waved his hand gently. I'm all right now. Don't you worry, my dear. That night, as they sat together on the bench again, sipping warm tea under the dim glow of the streetlight, he said quietly, You've been like family to me. Clara, I don't have much left in this world, but I'm grateful our paths crossed. She smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. Me too, Mr. Bennett, me too. What neither of them knew was that this friendship, born from a simple cup of coffee, was about to take an unexpected turn. Someone from Mr. Bennett's past was about to walk into their lives and nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were calm. The sun was softer, the air cooler, and autumn leaves began to scatter across the narrow streets of the little town. Clara worked steadily in her shop, humming softly as she sewed. Every now and then she'd look out the window, half expecting to see Mr. Bennett sitting on the bench with his newspaper. It had become part of her routine, that comforting sight of him waiting, smiling, ready for a chat. One bright morning, Clara arrived early to open the shop. The streets were quiet, except for a few shopkeepers sweeping their doorsteps. She placed the key in the lock, turned it, and pushed open the door. As she was about to step inside, she heard someone behind her say, "Excuse me, miss." The voice was calm, polite, and unfamiliar. Clara turned and saw a man standing a few feet away. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed neatly in a gray coat. His hair was slightly ruffled from the wind, and there was a tired but kind look in his eyes. "Yes?" she said, a little cautious but friendly. He gave a small smile. "I'm looking for someone. An older man, white hair, about this tall." He gestured with his hand. "I was told he spends time around this street. His name is Bennett. Would you happen to know him?" Clara blinked in surprise. Mr. Bennett? Yes, I do. He comes by here often. Are you a friend of his? The man's smile grew faintly wider. I'm his son. For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. She had heard about him, of course, in quiet stories told between sips of tea and shared laughter. The son who had gone to the city. The one Mr. Bennett spoke of with such pride and a touch of longing. And now here he was, standing right in front of her. You're his son? She repeated softly, almost to herself. Yes, he said, nodding. My name is Daniel. I just got back from working abroad. I went to the house where he used to live, but the neighbors said he hadn't been there in months. One of them mentioned seeing him around this area near a tailor shop. That's how I found you. Clara felt a rush of relief and happiness. He'll be so glad to see you. He's spoken about you many times. Daniel's expression softened. He has? That sounds like him. Clara smiled warmly. He's been spending time nearby. Sometimes he sits on the bench down the street. Let me take you there. Together they walked down the familiar road. The morning breeze carried the smell of fresh bread from the bakery, and a few early shoppers were out. As they turned the corner, Clara spotted the old man sitting in his usual spot, his head slightly bowed as if he were lost in thought. His hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee she had brought him earlier. Mr. Bennett, Clara called out cheerfully. He looked up and his face lit up as always when he saw her. Ah, my favorite seamstress. You're early today. But then as he noticed the man beside her, his smile froze for a moment. His eyes widened. Daniel? The younger man stopped a few steps away, his voice quiet, almost trembling. Hello, Dad. There was a pause. A long, still silence filled only by the faint sounds of the town waking up. Then the old man slowly stood, his hands shaking. I can't believe it's really you. Daniel stepped forward, and before another word could be said, they embraced. The hug was long and tight, the kind that holds years of distance, regret, and love all at once. Clara stood nearby, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. It felt like witnessing something sacred, a moment that life itself had been saving for just the right time. When they finally sat down, the old man looked at his son with disbelief. You've changed, Daniel. You look stronger, older. Daniel smiled faintly. And you, Dad? You look the same. Just a little thinner. Why didn't you tell me things had gotten this bad? You should have written to me. Mr. Bennett sighed, his voice quiet. I didn't want to worry you. You had your own life to live. Clara excused herself for a few moments, giving them space to talk. But as she worked in the shop later that morning, she couldn't stop thinking about them. Every time she looked toward the bench, she saw them talking, sometimes laughing, sometimes silent, but together again. By noon, Daniel came to the door of the shop. Thank you, he said sincerely. If it weren't for you, I might not have found him. Clara shook her head quickly. You would have, eventually. I just gave a little help. No, he said, his voice firm but kind. He talks about you a lot. You've been a friend to him when he needed it most. I owe you more than you realize, she smiled shyly. He's been a friend to me, too. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. Still, thank you. You've done more than anyone else probably would. They talked for a while. Clara learned that Daniel had been working overseas, saving money to start a business back home. He had been sending letters to his father, but the letters must have been lost somewhere. He had no idea how much his father's life had changed. That evening, Daniel helped his father gather his things from the small shelter where he had been staying. Clara watched them from across the street as they walked slowly toward a rented car. Before they left, Mr. Bennett turned back and called out, Clara, don't think you're getting rid of me that easily. I'll be back to visit, you hear? She laughed, waving at him. I'll hold you to that. After they left, the shop felt strangely quiet. The bench looked emptier than usual, yet in her heart Clara felt nothing but happiness. The old man was safe, reunited with his son, and that, she thought, was the best ending she could have asked for. But life, as it often does, had more in store than she expected. A few days later, while she was finishing an order, the bell over her shop door rang. She looked up, and there was Daniel again, holding a small paper bag. Good morning, he said. Daniel. What a surprise. How's your father doing? He's much better, Daniel said, setting the bag on her counter. He's resting at the small house I rented nearby. He wanted me to bring you this. Inside the bag were some pastries from the town's nicest bakery, and a small note in shaky handwriting that read, For my dear friend Clara, thank you for the coffee that started it all. Clara smiled warmly, her eyes misty. That's so sweet of him. Daniel leaned against the counter, looking around the shop. So this is where all the magic happens? She laughed softly. Magic might be too strong a word. It's mostly thread, patience, and a lot of long nights. He smiled. It's impressive. My father wasn't exaggerating when he said you're talented. She looked down, slightly embarrassed. He said that? All the time, Daniel replied. He said you reminded him of himself. Someone who builds things with their hands and their heart. Something about the way he said it made Clara's heart feel warm. They talked for a while longer, sharing stories about work, travel, and the little quirks of small-town life. Daniel told her about his business ideas. He was planning to open a small clothing company that focused on handmade designs and sustainable materials. Clara listened with genuine interest. That's a wonderful idea, she said. People appreciate things that are made with care. He nodded. That's what I thought too. And I could use someone who knows the craft inside out. She tilted her head. Someone like... Who? He grinned. Like you. Clara blinked in surprise. Me? Why not? Daniel said simply. You have the skill, the experience, and the heart for it. My father told me how much effort you put into everything you make. I could really use that kind of dedication. Clara hesitated. I don't know, Daniel. I've always worked here. I don't think I'm ready for something bigger. He smiled reassuringly. No one ever feels ready. But sometimes the right opportunity finds you. And all you have to do is take the first step. She thought about it for a moment. The idea scared her, but it also stirred something inside. That quiet dream she had always carried. The one of having her own studio, creating her own designs. Maybe this was her chance. Let me think about it, she said softly. Of course, Daniel replied with a smile. Take all the time you need. Before he left, he added, My father wants to come by tomorrow to see you, by the way. He says he misses your tea already, Clara laughed. Tell him I'll have the kettle ready. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. The old man she had helped on a cold morning. The friendship that had grown from kindness, and now, his son offering her something that could change her life. She turned toward her work table, where the little wooden sewing machine and the heart-shaped keychain rested side by side. They seemed to smile back at her, quiet symbols of how small acts could create big changes. The next morning, when Mr. Bennett and Daniel came by together, the shop filled with laughter again. The old man looked healthier, his face brighter. I told you I'd be back, he said proudly. And right on time, Clara replied. They spent the morning sharing stories, drinking tea, and talking about life. As they left, Daniel looked at her and said gently, The offer still stands. Clara met his gaze, her heart steady. I'll do it, she said. His smile was immediate and genuine. Then let's make something great together. And just like that, Clara's life began to shift again. The beginning of something new, born from a cup of coffee, a kind heart, and a chance encounter on a chilly morning. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Sometimes, the people who enter our lives by chance are the ones who change it forever. The days that followed Clara's decision to join Daniel's business felt like the start of something new. The promise of change was in the air, and for the first time in a long while she could feel her heart racing with excitement. But with that excitement came a mixture of uncertainty. She had spent so many years working alone, sewing for the small shop she had built with her own hands. The thought of taking on something bigger was both thrilling and daunting. She and Daniel started meeting regularly to discuss plans for the business. He had already found a small workshop on the outskirts of town, a quiet, sunny spot with plenty of space. Together, they would turn it into a place where their designs could come to life. Clara would be responsible for the sewing, of course, but the vision for the business, the branding, the designs, it would be a team effort. It was overwhelming at times, but it felt like the right kind of challenge. Every morning, Clara would leave her small shop and walk to the workshop, feeling a mixture of nerves and excitement. The first few days were spent sorting out the space, cleaning, organizing, and setting up. There was a lot of work to be done, but Clara was used to that. Her hands moved quickly as she sorted through fabric, trying to imagine the possibilities of what they could create. It was all still a bit surreal to her, like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake up from. Daniel, on the other hand, had a vision from the start. He was already talking about ideas for the brand. We'll focus on classic, sustainable designs, he said one afternoon, sketching in his notebook. Timeless pieces made to last. Clothes that tell a story like the ones you make. Clara smiled softly. I've always believed that, you know. Clothes should be more than just something to wear. They should have meaning. And that's what we'll sell, Daniel said with a determined look. Meaning, purpose. Every piece we create will have a story behind it. That idea resonated deeply with Clara. She had always poured herself into every piece she made, making sure the stitching was perfect, the fabric felt right. It was the little details that mattered to her. She felt the same way about this new venture. It had to be more than just a business. It had to be something they both believed in. Over the next few weeks, their vision started to take shape. Daniel handled the branding, while Clara worked on designing the first collection. They decided to focus on women's wear at first. Simple, elegant pieces that could be worn every day but still feel special. Clara was proud of the design she came up with. There was a beauty in simplicity, she thought, and she worked hard to make sure the clothes were as comfortable as they were stylish. At first, things moved slowly. There were challenges with suppliers, delays with shipments, and a few design tweaks that had to be made. But through it all, Daniel remained optimistic. His energy was contagious. He had a way of seeing the bigger picture, even when the small details seemed overwhelming. Clara admired that about him. She had always been focused on the craftsmanship of her work, but Daniel's broader vision made her excited about what they could build together. One day, a month into the project, they received their first shipment of fabric, a beautiful, soft cotton in a pale, calming shade of blue. Clara ran her fingers over it, feeling the quality. It was exactly what they had wanted. She turned to Daniel, a smile on her face. "This is it," she said, her voice full of excitement. "We're finally here." Daniel grinned back, his eyes lighting up. "We are. And this is just the beginning." As they began to cut the fabric and sew the first pieces together, something clicked between them. It was as if they had found their rhythm. Clara worked tirelessly on the sewing machine, stitching with the same care she always had. Daniel, on the other hand, managed the logistics, organizing, overseeing, and keeping everything moving forward. They made a great team, each of them bringing something valuable to the table. The first pieces of clothing were simple: a dress with delicate pleats, a blouse with a modest neckline, and a pair of high-waisted trousers. Clara was proud of the work they had done. It felt like her vision had come to life, but better, because it was now part of something bigger. When the pieces were finished, they put them on a rack in the back of the workshop. They looked beautiful, like the kind of clothes you would wear every day but still feel special in. "Do you think people will like them?" Clara asked one afternoon, nervously running her fingers over the fabric. Daniel looked at her, his expression serious for a moment. "I don't just think they will like them," he said confidently. "I know they will." It was that belief, that unwavering optimism that Clara had come to rely on. With Daniel by her side, it felt like anything was possible. The next step was getting their creations out into the world. They decided to host a small event at a local cafe, inviting friends, family, and a few influential people in the town to take a look at the collection. It was a small event, nothing too extravagant, but Clara was nervous. What if people didn't like the clothes? What if no one showed up? The night of the event, the cafe was bustling with activity. The warm, cozy space was filled with chatter and laughter as people milled around, sipping coffee and nibbling on pastries. Clara felt a knot in her stomach as she stood by the door, her hands nervously smoothing out the fabric of her dress. Daniel stood beside her, looking calm and collected as always. "You're doing great," he said, noticing her nervousness. Clara forced a smile. I don't know. What if no one buys anything? What if they don't like it?" Daniel gave her a reassuring look. "Don't worry. The clothes will speak for themselves. And if they don't sell tonight, that's okay. It's all part of the process." Clara nodded, though she couldn't shake the worry that lingered in her chest. As the evening wore on, people started to gather around the clothing rack, admiring the dresses and blouses. There were compliments, nods of approval, and even a few requests for custom orders. Clara's heart started to calm, and a smile slowly spread across her face. By the end of the night, they had sold several pieces. It wasn't a huge success, but it was a start. A real, tangible start. Clara couldn't stop smiling as she packed up the remaining clothes. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that people had connected with the clothes, that something she had created with her own hands had found its way into someone else's life. As the event wound down, Daniel walked over to her, a proud smile on his face. "See? I told you." Clara laughed, her shoulders relaxing. "You were right. This feels good. It's more than I expected." "I told you we could do it," Daniel said, his tone warm and proud. "And we'll keep doing it. We're just getting started." That night, as Clara lay in bed, she couldn't help but think about how far she had come. From sewing alone in her small shop to standing side by side with Daniel, watching their dream take shape. She realized how much had changed in just a few short months. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. In the morning, she woke up early, as she always did. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the town. Clara sat on the edge of her bed, taking a deep breath. There was still so much work to be done, so many hurdles to overcome. But now she felt ready for it. She had a vision, a purpose, and a partner who believed in her. They would keep moving forward, step by step, stitch by stitch. And somehow, as she looked out the window at the waking town, she knew everything would be okay. They were on the right path, and no matter what came next, Clara was ready to face it. The future felt bright. Weeks turned into months, and life began to change for Clara in ways she had never imagined. The little workshop that once smelled of fresh fabric and paint had now become a small but busy studio. Each morning she arrived early, the hum of her sewing machine filling the room while the sun slowly streamed through the windows. It was peaceful yet full of energy, a quiet kind of happiness that made her heart feel full. The business was growing faster than either of them expected. People from nearby towns started hearing about their work. Some came just to see the designs, while others placed custom orders. There was something special about what they were making. It wasn't just the clothes, but the care behind them. Each piece carried a touch of Clara's heart, and people could feel it. Daniel often joined her in the mornings, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He would place one beside her sewing table and smile. "You've been here since dawn again, haven't you?" Clara would laugh softly, brushing a few strands of hair from her face. "Maybe. I lose track of time when I'm working." He'd shake his head, amused. "You need to rest sometimes, you know. You can't run a business if you wear yourself out." "I know," she'd reply with a small grin, "but I can't help it. I love this," and she did. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just working to survive. She was working for something that meant something, something she could call her own. Despite their success, not everything came easily. There were moments of doubt, times when orders got delayed or fabrics ran out too soon. Once, an entire batch of clothing had a stitching flaw, and Clara had to redo all of them from scratch. She stayed up late for nights on end, her fingers aching, her eyes tired. Daniel stayed by her side through it all, helping however he could, even if it was just by keeping her company. Sometimes he would bring dinner to the workshop and insist she take a break. One evening, when she was close to tears from exhaustion, Daniel gently took the needle from her hand. "That's enough for tonight," he said softly. "You're only human. You can't do everything alone." Clara sighed. "I just don't want to let anyone down. We've worked so hard for this." "I know," he said quietly, "but you've already proven yourself. Look how far you've come." She looked at him then, her eyes tired but filled with gratitude. "I wouldn't have come this far without you." Daniel smiled. "And I wouldn't have done any of this without you." The room went quiet for a moment. There was something gentle in the air, not spoken but felt. Then Clara looked back at her sewing machine and said softly, "Okay, maybe I'll stop for tonight." Over time, their bond grew stronger. They shared laughter, long conversations, and the quiet moments between work. They learned to read each other without words. When one was worried, the other always seemed to know. There was comfort in that connection, something simple and real that neither of them had expected to find. Then one morning, a letter arrived at the workshop. It was from a well-known local magazine that focused on small businesses and inspiring people. They had heard about Clara and Daniel's story, about how a seamstress and a businessman had built something meaningful from scratch, and they wanted to feature them in their next issue. Clara couldn't believe it. "They want to write about us?" she asked, wide-eyed, holding the letter in disbelief. Daniel laughed. "Of course they do. You're incredible, Clara. You've worked for this." She smiled, still dazed. "No, we worked for this." The article came out 2 weeks later. It told their story beautifully. How kindness had brought 2 strangers together, how passion and hard work turned into something more. The story touched many people. Orders began pouring in, and their little workshop soon had more work than they could handle. Clara decided to hire 2 young women to help with sewing. She trained them herself, teaching them not just how to stitch, but how to care about what they made. Every piece matters, she told them, because when someone wears what you make, you're a small part of their life. It was the same lesson she had learned from her own journey, that even small acts of love could grow into something extraordinary. Business continued to flourish, and soon they were able to move to a larger studio. It wasn't fancy, but it was bright, open, and filled with life. There were racks of fabric, sketches pinned to the walls, and the soft hum of machines. It was everything Clara had ever dreamed of. One evening, as the sun set through the windows, Clara stood quietly, looking around the new space. "Do you remember the first day?" she asked Daniel. "When this was just an idea?" He smiled. "I do. You were nervous. You said you didn't think you were ready," she laughed. "I was terrified. And now look at you," he said, his voice full of pride. "You're running your own brand. People admire your work." Clara shook her head slightly. "It's still hard to believe." Daniel paused for a moment, then said gently, "You deserve it, Clara. Every bit of it. You've earned this." She looked at him then, her eyes warm. We both did. Their friendship had become something steady, a quiet strength that carried them through everything. And though neither had said it out loud, there was something deeper growing between them. It wasn't rushed or loud. It was patient, kind, and full of respect. It was the kind of connection that didn't need words to be real. One morning, as they were preparing for another busy day, an older man walked through the studio door, Mr. Bennett. He looked healthier now, his step steady, his smile bright. Clara's face lit up the moment she saw him. "You're here," she said happily, rushing to greet him. "I had to see it for myself," he said with a chuckle, looking around at the studio. "You two have done something remarkable." Daniel smiled, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "We couldn't have done it without you, Dad. You're the reason we met." Mr. Bennett laughed. "Ah, so buying me a cup of coffee was the best decision you ever made, wasn't it?" Clara laughed too, her eyes shining. "It really was." They spent the afternoon together, sharing stories, memories, and laughter. Mr. Bennett told her how proud he was of what she had accomplished. "You've proven something important," he said gently. "That kindness never goes to waste. It always finds its way back to you, one way or another." His words stayed with her long after he left. Months later, the brand continued to grow. Their clothes were being sold in nearby cities, and people often came to visit the studio to meet the woman behind the designs. But even as success surrounded her, Clara remained humble. She still treated every customer with warmth, still stitched with care, still remembered where she came from. One evening, as she closed the studio for the night, Daniel handed her a small box. "What's this?" she asked curiously. "Just open it," he said, smiling. Inside was a delicate golden pendant in the shape of a small spool of thread. It was simple yet beautiful. "It's for you," he said softly, "to remind you of where it all started." Clara looked at it, her eyes filling with emotion. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." Daniel looked at her, his voice quiet but sure. "You've changed my life, Clara, I mean that." She smiled, her heart full. "You changed mine too." As they stood there in the quiet studio, surrounded by the faint scent of fabric and the golden light of the setting sun, everything felt complete. Not perfect but real. They had built something together, not just a business, but a story, a legacy, and a connection that would last a lifetime. Clara often thought back to that cold morning, the day she bought coffee for a stranger sitting alone on the street. She had no idea that simple act would change her entire life. It reminded her that the smallest gestures could lead to the biggest miracles. Now, when people asked how her journey began, she would smile and say softly, "It all started with a cup of coffee." And as she went back to her work each day, she carried that truth with her, that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change everything.